especially you first-timers who raised your hand. As we begin all things at St. Clement, we will begin tonight with a prayer. In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Good and gracious God, thank you for this and every day. As we continue this summer's Theology on Tap, help us open our hearts and minds to learn more about our Catholic faith. As we learn more about our faith, inspire us to live it out more fully each day. On this night, bless our speaker, Michael O'Loughlin, as he gives his talk. May it be an opportunity for us to all better understand the relationship between faith and media, and to bring richer understanding into our daily conversations and decisions. We ask this as we ask all things through your Son, our Lord, Jesus Christ. Amen. Okay. A few quick announcements. Restrooms inside. Ladies, you are right down at the base of the stairs. Guys, you got to go around the corner. It's a scavenger hunt. Good luck. Please make sure to deposit any trash and recycling into the bins around the plaza. Your cleanup volunteers, thank you. Speaking of volunteers, we are again this week in mismatching some kind of red, orange, yellow, something t-shirts. They should say volunteer. If they don't, ask somebody in red. If they, again, stare at you blankly, probably not a volunteer, ask somebody else. There will be a Q&A session tonight after a brief intermission. Please note please make a note on the Q&A index cards that will be passed out after the talk. And finally, to introduce our distinguished guest. Michael O'Loughlin reports on the Catholic Church for the Boston Globe's Crooks. Is that right? Crooks. And is the author of The Tweetable Pope, due out September 8th from Harper One Publishers. Before joining Crooks, he spent 5 years in Washington, D.C. as a freelance writer and has been interviewed on Fox News, MSNBC, and NPR to discuss the Catholic Church's influence in public life. Originally from Massachusetts, Michael is a graduate of St. Anselm College and Yale Divinity School. Without further ado, please join me in welcoming Michael.
Thanks, Ryan, for that introduction. Thank you all so much for coming out tonight. It is a spectacularly beautiful summer evening, and while I'm relatively new to Chicago, I know that there are 101 other things competing for your interest and attention tonight. So the fact that you're here is just incredibly humbling, and I hope that the next 30 to 40 minutes or so fulfill your expectations and that we have a great time. Before we begin, I want to thank Father Ken and Christina and all the volunteers here. Incredibly welcoming, answering all my questions, inviting me to be with you tonight. What a fun experience. I've never been to a Theology on Tap at St. Clement's, and this is really remarkable to see so many young faces giving up their time to, practice their faith in this rather unique way. It's a really encouraging, inspiring part of Catholic life that I don't always get to see as a reporter. These are the moments that I realize it's not all bad news. There's a lot of good stories out there, and I think that this is one of those stories. I've been reporting for Crux, the Boston Globe's Catholic website, for about a year now. But before that, I was working in Washington, D.C. for a couple of Catholic nonprofits and writing freelance for several publications. And in those jobs, I would travel around the country quite often. And I have to say, especially within the last year when I mentioned I was moving to Chicago, St. Clement certainly has a reputation nationally for doing young adult ministry really, really well. When I told people I was moving here, they said, you have to check out this parish. It's just, vibrant and life-giving and filled with young adults. It's called St. Clement's. And I've had the opportunity to attend Mass here several times. I live a little bit ways away, but I make it a point to come down here when I need a little extra boost. And people were right. This is a great place. So I'm so honored to be here tonight with you. I understand that last week Archbishop Supich was the speaker. Record crowds, international record crowds, I'm told, overflow space, ran out of everything. And in addition to being just a great guy and an excellent pastor, Someone let me know that Archbishop Supich also gave a shout out to Crux as a resource for those interested in Catholic news. So A+ to him. We'll keep reporting good stories about him. And I understand that next week Father Manny Durantes is the speaker. And I know Manny a little bit through my reporting at the Vatican. Manny is the Spanish language press assistant for the Holy See press office. And it's a little bit of a joke among some reporters that Manny finds his way into every high-profile event in the life of the church. So you will not find a more connected speaker in touch with what's going on in our church. So I would encourage you to come out for that too, of course. As Ryan said, Crux is a project of the Boston Globe. It was launched almost a year ago under the direction of John Allen. For those who read Catholic media, John's sort of legendary in the Vatican world. John was brought over to the Boston Globe to help launch this new publication that attempts to cover all things Catholic, as our motto says. John does his thing reporting from Denver and from Rome. We have a full-time correspondent based at the Vatican who covers the day-to-day events over there, and I'm tasked with covering the Catholic Church in the United States, which is no small feat. The Boston Globe was fairly visionary. It remains one of the only secular publications in the United States to kind of come to an understanding that the Catholic Church's impact in this country is worthy of a slate of full-time reporters in its own publications. There are several very good Catholic publications that can fit all kinds of ideologies and spiritualities and viewpoints. But among secular press, there's a handful of excellent reporters who really get the church. But the Globe and Crux are fairly unique in that we kind of give the institution the respect that I think it deserves for how much effort is put into charity, spirituality, philanthropy. And we seek to cover the good, the bad, and everything in between. And I hope you'll check it out if you haven't yet. We're online at cruxnow.com. You'll find some of my writing, a lot of John's, and a lot of freelancers, kind of covering every component of Catholic life you can imagine. So I was told that the title of my talk tonight was Confessions of a Church Reporter. I'm not sure how many confessions there'll be, and if any of my sources are here, I assure you your secrets are safe with me. But I will highlight some of the stories that have inspired me, have made me laugh, made me cringe, challenged me, and kind of pushed me to understand that this church is much bigger and much more diverse than I think any one person can really appreciate. And as I was getting this talk ready, I was thinking of a way to open the conversation, and a story came to mind. This story I also recount in the Tweetable Pope, which, as Ryan said, comes out in September, but you can pre-order now at tweetablepope.com. So here's the story. Last October, the Globe asked me to head to Rome. Pope Francis had convened a meeting of bishops from all around the world to talk about issues facing the family. This was the first of a year-long process, the Synod on the Family, and the Globe recognized that this would be a really historic meeting. So they sent John, me, and our Vatican correspondent. We were all in Rome to cover it. And this was my first trip there as a reporter. And as a Catholic reporter, as a reporter who happens to be Catholic, it was really a whirlwind of emotion. For anyone who's been to Rome, you know that the Catholic Church permeates life in a way there that is just wholly different from here. And so I was sent to the Vatican. Every morning there would be an opportunity for a select group of from the press to enter the Synod Hall where the meetings were taking place. And one morning I was fortunate enough to be part of this group. And we enter the room, and I'm expecting like Sistine Chapel, incense burning, mysterious chanting, and it's nothing like that. It's a college lecture hall, basically, with drop-down menus, drop-down screens and projectors, and kind of stadium-style seating. So it was interesting, a little bit of a letdown from what I had in mind, but still, there were cardinals and bishops milling around. It was an opportunity for journalists to try to seek some face time with people who you write about on a daily basis, to say hello, put a face to the name. it was a really lighthearted event, and I was surprised by this. I was told later that this was new. This was something Pope Francis had encouraged. Before, under his predecessors, it was a very solemn environment where bishops and cardinals would be seated waiting for the Pope to enter. It was a very quiet experience. But Pope Francis, his personality doesn't work quite well with that sort of environment. So people are laughing, telling jokes, and all of a sudden we see this figure in white come in from the left-hand side, and it's Pope Francis. I'm about as close to him here to maybe the back row back there. And one of my reporter friends, who's not Catholic, she leaned over to me and said, "This is a moment. This is a moment you'll remember for the rest of your career. Something's happening in the church. And here's this charismatic leader who's captured the world. Remember this." And I think she's right. Only as a Catholic, I think that there was this added layer of spirituality or spiritual reckoning I had to do on top of this. I'm reporting on this extraordinary event, and I'm also dealing with my own thoughts and opinions as a Catholic as well. And the whole week continued like this. There were these moments where, as a professional journalist, I'm there and I'm covering the event, but I'm also there as a Catholic, and you have to kind of balance the two and make it work. So the week goes by, it's successful. I'm able to interview a couple cardinals, several bishops. St. Peter's is right there in the background. It's really a surreal experience that I need to process that week. As we're leaving, or as I'm getting ready to leave, I have just a night left. I find myself at dinner with a priest who works in the Vatican. He had invited me out. He knew it was my first time there as a journalist. He wanted to see how the week went. So we were at a restaurant near St. Peter's, and as we were finishing up, we realized we were going the same way home. So he said, "I'll walk you home." So we cut through St. Peter's. Again, it's at night. It's a beautiful, crisp October evening. The dome of St. Peter's is illuminated. The columns, which signify welcoming people into the church, they're all perfectly lit up. And he brings me to a spot directly in the center of St. Peter's, where if you stand there, everything is perfectly symmetrical. It's a beautiful place to be. So he tells me to stand there for a minute, and he looks around, and he says, "Michael, take this all in." And he points up, and it's just this beautiful background. And here I am thinking that he's going to offer me a little bit of wisdom from the Pope, maybe a little off-the-record piece of wisdom that I can think about on my ride home. Or he's a great writer and preacher. Maybe he'll give me something, again, to think about as I'm reflecting on this week. So he's pointing up and he says, "Michael, nowhere else on earth can you cram more dysfunction into 1 square mile. Welcome to the Vatican." So I tell that story because it was funny and it stuck with me. And while it wasn't quite what I expected, I think he had a good point. He knew that I was awestruck by the institution. He knew that I had had a moving week. But he wanted to remind me that it's also a very human institution, and that my job as a journalist is to cover both sides of it. And that's what I've sought to do over the past year or so. And here are some of those stories that have stuck with me. A common thread through these stories is the idea that our church is hugely diverse, and that I've encountered people on both sides of many issues, and I think that I've come to the conclusion that the church is better off when all these different camps feel at home. I understand that St. Clement has done a really good job of making all kinds of people feel welcome. And I think that this is true for our church as well, that in order for the church to succeed and to continue to grow and thrive, a whole range of people have to feel welcome. And these are some of the people I've talked to over the past year. My first travel assignment at Crux was to head to Fargo, North Dakota. I had grown up on the East Coast, and I don't know the center of the country very well, so I was unsure of what to expect. I can't say I was thrilled to be headed out to Fargo, but it was a new place, so I figured, why not? I was headed out to cover a conference of Native American Catholics. Each year, there is a gathering of different tribes from around the country, all who are Catholic and all who come together to share their faith and talk about their struggles, their joys, their hopes, in a very safe, proud environment, I would say. I talked to a lot of different Catholics there, many of whom told me that they struggle with the history of the Catholic Church and their Native American identity. It's a topic that remains very much in the news today. When Pope Francis visits the United States in September, he'll canonize a saint who worked with Native American populations and brought Catholicism to the West Coast here. There are some who are saying that this saint's canonization is long overdue, and there's others who say he was complicit in the genocide of a Native people here. And that was the same impression I got from these Native Americans in Fargo. I talked to nuns who were fully Catholic, who said that they identify as Catholic first and foremost, and that their Native American heritage just happens to be who they are. I talked to one guy, a Pueblo Indian from New Mexico, who told me that, well, he goes to Mass on Sunday, and he recognizes the importance of his Catholic faith. He believes in Jesus and the sacraments. He said he's Native American first, and that he practices Native spirituality. He doesn't see a problem between the two, though he acknowledged that some priests or bishops might be horrified by what they see in a Native worship experience, but that they're all at Mass on Sunday. So there's this huge range, even within this small subsection of the church, that was completely foreign to me, but as a reporter I had the opportunity to go learn and ask really intimate personal questions, and people open up to me and share their stories. And I thought, this is one side of the church I had never encountered, but how much richer and diverse is our faith because of it. After that trip, I headed out to California. I convinced my boss to send me to Los Angeles. The trips were getting a bit better at this point. Where I met with a director of Catholic films named Jerry Straub. Jerry had been a highly successful producer of daytime television in the 1980s. His biggest hit was General Hospital, which I hear is still on. And he developed a show with Alec Baldwin. Jerry told me that he was making tons of money each week. He was hobnobbing with celebrities, living a life where he was based in New York and LA, could travel as frequently as he wanted between the two cities. He was raised Catholic, he said, but eventually had fallen away from the faith around high school, and said that he had become pretty much agnostic, if not atheist, during the pinnacle of his career. Anyway, things were going really well, but he said he felt spiritually empty and personally empty. He was running on fumes and decided to take a break from his production job. He took a trip to Rome. He was working on a novel in which he said the church was kind of cast as a villain, and wanted to do some primary research. When he got really tired walking around and decided to step into a small Franciscan church. He said it wasn't to pray, but just because it was sweltering out and he needed a place to sit down. He then recounts something of a mystical experience in which he said that he realized that he was exhausted because he had no spiritual life. He says that there was something telling him that he needed to use the gifts he had honed and the skills he had acquired for better purposes than making cash. He left Rome and returned to New York and reflected on this a little bit and decided that he would seek out opportunities to tell stories of people doing good for others. And because he was raised Catholic and knew a little bit about the church, he kind of went in that direction and ended up producing a segment for Good Morning America about a Franciscan soup kitchen in Philadelphia. It was really well received. The Franciscans there were able to raise a ton of money based on this exposure, and they were able to expand their ministry beyond what they were capable of before. So Jerry thought he was onto something. He decided that he would there and then devote his life to making films for Catholic charities and agencies around the world, highlighting their good work, donating those films back to the charities, and allowing them to use them for free for fundraising. He's now produced close to 20 films. Ministries have sprouted up all around the world because of his work, and he credits it all to this one mystical experience that he had in Rome. This is one of those stories where the ideas make sense to me, but I haven't experienced the same thing. But the opportunity to talk to someone who has and then tell that story to others is really a meaningful part of this job. Like I said, we launched a year ago in September, and that marked the first anniversary of an interview Pope Francis gave to a set of Jesuit journals. in which he made headlines for saying the church had become obsessed with culture war issues. That was his word, not mine. He said that he wished the church would lessen its focus on same-sex marriage and abortion and instead talk about poverty and inequality. So to mark that year anniversary, I decided to call some folks in Washington who work on these issues and ask, has the Pope's words, have they made any effect? I called up some lobbyists who work on the Hill, but their clients aren't the rich, powerful folks that we read about. They're the poor, they're Catholic charities, they're Catholic relief services. They're there to beg Congress not to cut the social safety net. They're there to remind Congress that budgets are moral documents. How we spend our money says a lot about who we are as a people. They push for expanded welfare programs. They push for more humane treatment of immigrants. They say that, yeah, the Pope's words have really helped. When a guy's as popular as Francis, lawmakers listen because they want in on that popularity. And when they can go into an office and say, this is what Pope Francis wants, people start to listen a little bit more. But I also reached out to some folks in D.C. who share the Pope's concerns that poverty is not being adequately addressed, but who cringe a little bit about critiques of capitalism that Pope Francis is so known for. For these folks, the best way out of poverty is a free market that encourages opportunity and jobs, and they too are lobbying lawmakers to get government out of the way. They're both motivated by their faith, but they approach the same issue from radically different directions. They say that they had a little bit more leeway before Pope Francis, and now they have to defend how they come to their conclusions a little bit more intensely. But again, I think the church is much better off when you have these two camps under the same tent. Both Catholic, both fighting for something they believe in passionately, but also both fairly diverse in how they go about doing that. The list goes on, and recently, one example is, as a reporter, your job is to kind of tackle complex issues and distill it down in a way that readers can skim an article and make sense of what's happening. And to do that, you have to have an idea of what you're talking about before you go visit someone. And I found myself headed to New York a couple months ago to cover a sacred liturgy conference. For months, I had people on Twitter haranguing me that I didn't know what I was talking about when it came to liturgy because I didn't know the Latin Mass. And now I disagreed with them, but I took them up on their dare, and I decided I would head to New York to cover this conference of Latin Mass enthusiasts. I had some preconceived notions. I expected an older crowd. I expected a very solemn, joyless crowd. But I was wrong. Part of the job is to get out into the field and make sure that what you think is true, and if it's not, you have to report you were wrong. I was wrong. It was a very young crowd. Lots of seminarians in their 20s and early 30s. They love sacred music, they told me. They love the opportunity to worship in a way that they say transcends kind of the mess we find ourselves in here and connects them to God on a different plane than we're used to, perhaps. The liturgies I attended were heavy on smells and bells, lots of lace, lots of gestures and liturgical moves I had not seen before. This was a wake-up moment for me. This was an opportunity for me to see, again, perhaps my preconceived notions of what it means to be Catholic aren't quite true. I left New York. I wrote up a story. I tried to highlight what I saw up there, and it became the most read story on Crux, most read story of mine on Crux, because I think it challenged the left and the right in different ways. The left kind of read it. I got a lot of emails slamming me for giving any press to this group of people. But the right also didn't like it either. They thought I was unfair in how I portrayed this group of people. I think what they both didn't like was that it forced them to get out of their bubbles. The traditional Latin Mass crowd tends to be pretty insular, and the kind of progressive Catholic Mass crowd tends to be suspect of anything that's a little bit different. But again, I think that this is a good thing if we have to be forced out of our comfort zones a bit to reckon with a church that's much bigger than anything that we can experience as one person. Another story that kind of rankled people a little bit was the story we did on women's leadership. Pope Francis has said time and time again that women's ordination is off the table. He cites John Paul II, who said that the door was closed on women's leadership, and Francis has said that he agrees with that, and he's not keen on reopening that conversation. However, Pope Francis has also said that women need to be respected in the church. They need to have a place at the table. He surprisingly has called for equal pay in the workplace. He's talked about families needing to respect the role of mothers and women who work outside the home. And he said that women need to be making decisions in the church. It can't all be left to the hierarchy. So we heard this and we thought, are the Pope's words being practiced here in the United States? So a colleague and I went through every diocese in the United States, about 200 of them, identified 3 key positions and said, are there women in these positions? Well, we were surprised. The church is painted often as being hostile to women. As everyone here knows, women are not ordained, so the CEO, effectively, of every diocese is a man. It's a bishop. But we found that there are women in top leadership posts in every single diocese, nearly every single diocese in this country. Half of the Catholic schools half of Catholic school superintendents are women. About a third of chancellors, those people in the diocese who do a range of things, sometimes up to the chief of staff level, other times records keepers, about a third of those folks are women. And 16% of chief financial officers in dioceses are women. Here in this archdiocese, one of the highest ranking administrative posts, the chief operating officer, is now a woman. So women are in these decision-making offices in the church. We reported that data. And then we asked some women in the church to comment on that. What did they think? And again, this question showed a range of opinion and a big collection of ideas about what this meant. We talked to the head of a women's ordination conference who said, so what? Women are second-class citizens because they're barred from the priesthood. She said, you can't show me anything that says otherwise. As long as that's the rule, we're not happy. Okay? We talked to some women who have worked in these positions in dioceses, and they said this is exactly what the Pope wants. Women are around the table, bishops rely on them, they are confidants, they're advisors, they're making decisions at every level of the church, and it's something to celebrate. They pointed out that the 3 of the largest Catholic organizations in this country, Catholic Health Association, Catholic Relief Services, and Catholic Charities, are all led by women. They pointed out that parishes are often led by women. There's a priest, of course, and then many of the parish staff jobs are women. They were thrilled with this data, and they said, it's a benchmark, it shows that more work can be done. I think both have a point. And I think the church is better off when both are invited to share their points, and when both feel welcome, and there's not one side or the other that's pushing someone else out. At the same time, though, I was reporting on a story developing out on the West Coast. In San Francisco, there was a parish that had decided girls could no longer serve as altar servers. And I found out that this was not an isolated parish, that there's one diocese that prohibits girls from serving as altar servers, and that there's a handful of parishes around the country. Now, these folks aren't sexist, I don't think. They tell me that, to them, altar servers it's a way to introduce young boys to possibility of serving as a priest later in life. And they say that it just doesn't make sense for them to have girls in this role because, in a way, it's rude because the role will stop eventually. Now, I see some people rolling their eyes, and I'm not giving you my opinion, I'm just saying what I reported. So, on the one hand, you have these women in these very high-profile positions, managing multi-million-dollar budgets, making decisions that impact the poor, Catholics around the country and around the world, really. On the other hand, you have some priests banning girls from serving in the church. Now, I suspect you'll find yourself on one side or the other of that debate. not just the ordination debate, but how women lead in the Catholic Church. But I would hope you wouldn't try to push the other side out. That's, I think, the biggest temptation, is that we want to take our viewpoints and kind of make them universal and make sure that there's not room for others. And I think the church might be weaker if we succumb to that temptation. So finally, with the stories and the diverse reactions, just a few weeks ago, the Supreme Court handed down two huge decisions that will affect the Catholic Church and will affect society as a whole. Of course, I'm talking about the court's decision to effectively legalize same-sex marriage and its decision to uphold key components of the Affordable Care Act, or Obamacare. Now, my job was to kind of collect Catholic reaction to those decisions. And some of it was predictable. Of course, you had the head of the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops issue a statement about the same-sex marriage decision, in which he said it was a grave error and that the court had overstepped its bounds. The Pope's top advisor here, Cardinal Sean O'Malley of Boston, said he was deeply saddened by the decision and worried what the decision meant for families, for children. But then, you don't have to go too far. As I wrote on Crux, you had other reaction from bishops showing a rather different approach. Archbishop Supich released a statement upholding the Church's definition of marriage, but challenging Catholics, saying, what do gay couples have to teach us about relationships and commitment? He highlighted the Church's long-standing teaching that gay people deserve to be treated with dignity and respect, but challenged Catholics again to say, this has to be real, it can't just be rhetorical. A handful of other bishops issued similar statements, and even in a hierarchy, the United States bishops, that's known around the world to be quite conservative, you saw that there was a diversity of opinion, even on these very contentious issues. Now, if you share Archbishop Kurtz or Cardinal Sean's views on marriage, you might be disappointed that you had opposing views out there. But polls show most Catholics are more in line with Archbishop Supich and Bishop McElroy of San Diego. So what a shame it would be if those Catholics who were kind of happy about the court's decision, what a shame it would be if they felt that they weren't being represented in the hierarchy. Instead, this strong diversity in the Church even played out at the hierarchical level, and I think provided a welcoming mat for a whole range of Catholics. Of course, I spoke to Catholics at the grassroots level who again shared this wide range of opinions. There were gay Catholics who told me that they were motivated by their faith to fight for same-sex marriage and LGBT rights. And there were Catholics who said no, that they were out in the public square kind of being ridiculed and mocked by progressives for their traditional views on marriage. And I thought, this is great. These are two young people, these are people I have in mind, who are on opposite sides, both motivated by their faith and both living out their Catholic identity in a very real way. I think that's very exciting. So I'm going to wrap up here in a few minutes. Because this event is for people in their 20s and 30s, none of us here know what it was like to live through Vatican II. The best we can do is kind of read about what it was like and listen to people who remember it. And what we read is that it was a really exciting time for the Church. That Catholics were thrilled, some Catholics were thrilled that there was a Pope who was kind of throwing open the windows of the Church, who wanted to bring in some fresh air. From Vatican II, we got Mass in the vernacular, we got the priest turned around, and perhaps most importantly, we got lay people to understand they need to step up and be part of the Church. It's not kind of a one-directional Church, it's all of us in this together. I think that sounds a lot like what we're experiencing right now. I suspect that we're living through an historical moment in the Church, and that Pope Francis is again challenging us to get out into the streets, as he put it, make a mess of things, take responsibility for our own faith. Over the next few months, there's going to be a lot going on in the Church. I think a lot of this excitement is going to kind of come to fruition, and it's up to us to decide how invested we want to be in this invitation from the Pope. As I'm sure most of you know, Pope Francis is visiting the United States in September. He arrives in Washington. He'll give an address to a joint meeting of Congress, which is the first time that's ever happened, a papal address to Congress. He'll visit a Catholic Charity Center in Washington, D.C. He'll meet with the President of the United States. He'll canonize a saint, and he'll address all the country's bishops at St. Matthew's Cathedral. From there, he'll head up to New York, where he'll give an address to the United Nations, where he's expected to highlight his teaching on the environment, his recent encyclical that covered a wide range of environmental issues, from what he described as man-made global warming to environmental degradation, all the way to things like how architecture is separating us from the natural environment. After New York, he'll head down to Philadelphia for a meeting of Catholic families. He'll be meeting with immigrant families, and he's expected to give an address in Spanish in which he'll call on the United States to be more hospitable to immigrant communities. This is a visit that's going to challenge the entire church in this country. This is not a pope who's comfortable being labeled as conservative or liberal. Democrats and Republicans are both going to be challenged in Congress. I suspect all the world's leaders will be challenged at the United Nations. And because we're all part of a family in one way or another, I think we'll be challenged when he gives addresses in Philadelphia. He'll also encourage us, and he'll ask us to take him up on his invitation to renew the church, to greet culture where it is, to see the church as a field hospital, as he's put it. When he's done in the United States, he'll head back to Rome. A week later, bishops will return for the second part of the Synod on the Family. The momentum and the pressure has been building for the past year. During the first part, there were discussions about, do gay families feel comfortable in parishes? Do Catholics who have been divorced and remarried, do they feel shamed or do they feel welcome in parish life? What about the role of women in the church? These questions will be taken up again, this time perhaps with more consequence, because Pope Francis is expected to make some decisions at the end of this synod. The gossiping and the sniping back and forth among bishops will undoubtedly continue, but there should be some resolution at this point. So in only a few months, I think that this Vatican II moment, this moment of excitement for our church, is really going to come to a head, and we'll see what happens. So this is my conclusion. As we all know, Pope Francis is wildly popular. Poll after poll shows that Democrats, Republicans, liberals, conservatives all love this guy, and they all want a piece of him. I think that he's so popular because he defies easy categorization. Like I said, we don't know if he's a liberal or conservative. I think both camps want to claim him, and both camps look to statements to kind of proof text to show that, no, he's one of us, no, he's one of us. But you can't easily do it. I think the church has to be the same. It'll be a shame if one side or the other kind of wields too much power, if it pushes the other camp out and becomes just another shill for one party, or if it becomes just too focused on one issue. The church has a lot to celebrate. Tonight, seeing all you is one of those things. It also has a lot of demographic challenges to face. Just this morning, Father Robert Barron, a Chicago priest, was named an auxiliary bishop in Los Angeles. And during his press conference in LA today, he said, look, I understand the church has a lot of issues, including the fact that 70% of the Catholic faithful don't practice their faith. Well, that is an optimistic reading of the data. The number is probably actually higher. Among millennial Catholics, we're hemorrhaging numbers. A Pew study came out a couple months ago. For every one Catholic that joins the church, this is RCIA or baptism, 6 are leaving. We're losing Catholics at a faster rate than any other denomination in this country. A wildly popular pope is not going to be able to fix this. He can encourage us to be better at what we do, but the solution lies with us, with all of you here tonight. And I think the best way that I've seen through my reporting anyway, is for us to create an institution that is welcoming for everyone, where all camps feel like they can be part of the church, and where we understand that we're all on the same team, even if we're going about it in different ways. Thank you.
All right, can I get a couple of volunteers up here for note cards, please? All right, thank you, Michael. I know that I can speak for myself and probably for many out here when I say it's very tempting to view our Catholic identity often through a political lens, so it's very gratifying to hear both sides of the spectrum and the experiences that you had in speaking to Catholics across the country. So we are going to have a brief intermission momentarily, but first a few announcements. First, we are going to be passing out index cards and pens for Q&A. You guys can write these down. There will be people in various shades of red walking around to collect those, or you can bring them up and set them on the podium, and we will sort through them and try to get as many questions as we can answered this evening.